Alright guys, this is your boy Otaku Phil here, doing a video on my flight sim. I had a request from my boy Juan off of YouTube, who asked me about my setup. So I belong to a small, well, relatively large community of flight simmers who, they try to go for as much realism and accuracy in their flight sims in order to get that real-time complexity of operating a commercial or even a general aviation aircraft. For those who know, I left Greyhound. I still drive, but one of the main reasons I left was to pursue a career in aviation. I do have a check ride coming up soon, and that's a lot of information to study for. But flight simming helps a lot. It helps with maneuvering, it helps with procedures. If you're interested in doing instrument flight, flight simming is honestly, I think, a must. There are a lot of instrument procedures that you can easily simulate over and over again to get that complexity and the comfort of doing it in real life. So I told my boy Juan, I'd show him a little bit about my own flight sim setup. I think it's a very attainable flight sim setup. Altogether, I would say, not including my computer, because you can do the level of simming that a lot of people do with a more inexpensive computer. So I wouldn't really consider my computer. But as far as displays, controls, and things like that, I would say I've spent in the neighborhood of around $600. So it was $600 for my yoke, my pedals, my button box, screens, iPad, tablets, and software. So I use, starting from the right to the left, I use 4 screens. So if you look over here on the right, this is my main display. And my main display, a lot of people ask me, your main display is on the right. How do you fly with it on your right? I don't. The main display is typically for en route. So once I've turned on autopilot, once I'm, in cruise, and I'm really just seeing to the small things, I put it on the main display. I use a 4K Samsung monitor, and, it works great, for just being the cruise machine here. So, like I do FedEx, Virtual Airlines a lot, and I use their load sheets and their information to plan routes, plan fuel, cargo, and things of that nature. So that's my main screen right here. My next screen here, if you take a look, is my Garmin Pilot screen. So I use a Samsung Note. This is the Note 10. It's an older tablet. You can get one of these guys for probably like $80, maybe even cheaper. It's a big screen, 10-inch screen. I typically use it for some programs don't have times on them. Like if you're doing some virtual airlines, it won't tell you how long your route is. So I'll use it for flight planning, for viewing VFR charts, and for planning my route and getting my estimated time en route and time at leg deals. So it's key for these kind of things. If you're doing VFR flight and general aviation, if you're doing commercial, it's really nice to know your ETEs and your ETAs for route legs and all that good stuff. And learning how to read VFR charts, I think, is another great thing for those who are interested in getting into simming. If you're more advanced, you can easily change it and do your IFR low to see your different Victor ways and VOR points and all that stuff, and your Victor high and your IFR highs and all that good stuff. So I use a program that's called Garmin Pilot. It came with my flight school. There are a lot of students who like to use ForeFlight, and ForeFlight works the same way. You can connect it to your simulator, and it will track your flights in the simulator and give you information on your flights, your speeds, your altitudes, all that good stuff. So if we move over to the next tablet, so I got this guy, again, really cheap. This was just an iPad. I think this is a 2nd generation iPad mini. So this guy I use for, either my flight management system. You know, there's a flight management system that is built into the simulator, and you got to use your mouse and stuff. And it's a lot easier to manage it and change things by just being able to, you know, touch it to go through pages and change route information and do all that stuff. I use FMC Pro. You can, if you're just flying GA planes and you're doing like the Zibo mod, which is the most popular 737, you can use the Web FMC Pro, or it's the Web FMC Pro, not Pro, sorry, the free, which is free, and you can use the Zibo with it and put in your route information. So I like just having that information separate from my main screen so that I don't have to, you know, constantly be moving my view to see it plus see your main displays and information. So this right here on the left, my last screen, is just my auxiliary screen. I use it for looking up charts, looking up routes, loading programs and stuff like that, because I don't like to be hopping back and forth between my main screen and popping up stuff. If you've been using programs like X-Plane, which is a simulator that I use a lot, once you start opening and closing stuff and messing with a lot, you run a high risk of it crashing. So if you have it on a second screen, it typically doesn't interfere much with your main screen. You know, especially if you're doing something like planning a route. If you're just on one screen, it's hard to be green. I bought from Staples during their Black Friday sale, and this screen was just like 50 bucks. You know, so it doesn't have to be a great expensive monitor. I know a lot of people want to have high resolution monitors to basically get the best out of their sim, but just remember, flight simulators are terribly optimized. So if you're going to be running at high refresh rates and high resolutions, you got to have a beefy machine to go with it. And you know, honestly, with X-Plane and programs like that, once you start adding in extra maps, extra scenery, heavier duty planes and things like that, the sweet spot is 1440p. I run 4K, and on average I get probably like 30 frames per second, you know. But I've seen plenty of people who had the same setup I had running 1440p. It still looks good, and they're blasting 60 frames per second, you know. 1080p is okay. The thing about 1080p is once you start doing large 1080p screens, you're gonna get a bunch of weird distortion. So 1440p is the best way to go if you want really good looking graphics and good performance. All right, now I'll get to my controls. So one of the reasons my controls are on the left are because I do a lot of VR. All my takeoffs and all my landings are in VR. They're all in VR. I don't do any hand flying. I always do in VR. I find that in VR, it just makes it so much more immersive. You can see things better. You know, it's no longer a matter of looking at your controls and doing mouse and keyboard and all that stuff, and then trying to line up the runway. Yeah, I never really got into the whole flying by monitor thing. If you were able to have like a big triple monitor setup, maybe that'd be a lot easier. But for me, I just found it cheaper and better to just run VR. I run the Oculus Rift S. You can run, because if I were to recommend the best VR setup, I'd probably go with the original Oculus CV. It's a lower resolution, but it runs a lot better on most systems, and sometimes the tracking with the Rift S, because it has the inside-out tracking, isn't always great. So sometimes it'll act up a bit. You know, I had the CV1, and then I bought the Rift S because I wanted the higher resolution, and I kind of regret it, you know, because I use my VR 90% of the time in just flight simming. It kind of makes it a bit of a pain. So there's that. Starting here on my right here, I have a button box. So I made this button box, and it basically takes the place of my MCP or my autopilot. You know, it has rotaries here that work and they move everything. So if you look here, as I turn it here, you can see here on the screen that it works perfectly with it, and I love that. Especially if you're in VR. The VR controls can be a little twitchy, but I have big buttons that are easy to feel around and easy to manage, so that I can just freaking easily be flying, be in VR, not see anything outside, and just be able to feel for a particular button to change altitudes, change speeds, and all that stuff, activate my autopilot and all that good stuff. Underneath that guy, just two basic SciTech quadrants. I have basic mapping for my mixture and my prop for when I fly like the 208. I use the 4 here for whether I'm flying the 747 or the 737. I just use these guys. I map these buttons to some basic controls. Like I've got, what is this? My gear up and down. This guy, if I'm trying a new plane and I don't feel like learning, this is my auto start and auto shut off here. These are my fuel cutoff and idle buttons here for when I'm starting, like the 737 or the 777. This is my auto brake controls, so it turns my auto brake up and down. And this I use as my my air brake up and down button. So real basic right here. Now, as far as my yoke, I use the SciTech Pro, and a lot of people give the SciTech Pro a lot of shit because it's considered like the standard now. It's an inexpensive yoke that a lot of people like to use, but it's not the best as far as controls go. The detent makes it really hard. But if you look online, I'll probably put the link to it. I did the spring mod, the spring and the it's the spring and the zip tie mod. So basically, you remove the center detent and you replace it with 2 large springs on each side inside of the yoke. And what that does is it gets rid of that center detent, making it move and react much smoother. You don't get that heavy detent pulling on you. So because of that, you can make much more precise, smoother control movements, which is key when you're flying some airplanes, especially smaller planes. I hated flying and then having, trying to pull back and having it bounce all over the place or having to fight it. So by doing the spring mod, it's much smoother. As far as my pedals, I use the CH Pro pedals. Let's see if I can get some more light here. So I use the CH Pro pedals. Camera here. There we go. So I use the CH Pro. I got these guys dirt cheap. I think I bought them at like a freaking swap meet or a thrift store for just like freaking, I think I got them for just like 40 bucks or 20 bucks or something like that. I had a whole set. I got the pedals and the yoke, but the yoke seemed kind of old-fashioned to me. So I ended up giving it to my dad who wanted to just mess around with them, and I had the SciTech. So yeah, altogether, like I said, I probably spent less than, the Rift was like 300 bucks. The pedals, again, like I said, it was just like 20, 40 bucks. The yoke I bought brand new, and I think that was like 150 bucks, but it came with 1 quadrant. I found the second quadrant at a swap meet, and I got this guy, I think, for just like 10 bucks. The button box I built, but altogether with the innards and all the buttons and stuff, I spent, I think, like 100 bucks to build the button box. Again, my secondary monitor, that was just like 50 bucks. The tablet was 40 bucks. The Note Samsung tablet was just like, I think like 60 bucks or something like that, or 80 bucks. My main screen, I got this guy a while ago. I paid like, I think like 300 bucks for it when they first came out. They're a little older now, but it's still a 4K monitor. It looks great. As far as my system goes, I spent probably like about $3,500 on my system. I run a 9700K overclock to 5 gigahertz. I run a custom EK water block. I run, what is it, 40, is it 43? I always forget the number of how many gigs of RAM I run. I run system. I run 48 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, so I run 48 gigs of RAM. I have a 1 terabyte SSD, a 256 gig NVMe. I have a 1 terabyte standard drive and a 4 terabyte standard drive in there, and that's just, you know, holds a bunch of pictures and scenery, environments, and stuff like that. If you're worried, like if I do a lot of ortho stuff and that adds to the scenery, if you're worried about ortho and adding a bunch of scenery, just remember you can add scenery to any drive as long as you link it within the scenery folder itself. And doing that just basically, it'll add to your load times, but if they're fast enough drives, it's not a big deal. So that's my basic setup, you know. Like I said, if I were to rebuild it again, if I had the space, I would consider a triple system with a dash, you know, like a home cockpit dash, just to have that extra comfort. You know, I love flying in VR because of the total immersion, but the main thing about it is it's uncomfortable for long flights. So typically, like I said, I'll taxi and I'll take off in VR, and then I'll just switch to my main screen, and then once I get into the approach and I'm like 10-20 minutes out, I'll hop back into VR, do the approach and the landing. So that's the only thing I would do. But you know, home cockpits are not that expensive. If you were, like I said, the most expensive part is the computer. But other than that, you know, if you were to buy like a G1000 setup, that'd probably run you like $700. But that'd probably be like the most expensive thing that you got, you know. The rest of it, you know, the stacks that you can get from SciTech only run, I think, like $100 a piece. You know, they're not that big of a deal. The yolks would probably be your second deal. Like the honeycomb is like now the big thing. Everybody wants the honeycomb yolks, and those are like like $250, $260 now. So you can go and build something cheaper. I like having the multiple monitors and big setup, and I love doing VR, so that's what I ended up doing. A lot of the stuff I got little by little. I started off with just the yoke and the pedals, and then just one screen. And then as I started doing more complex things and trying to get more realistic, I started adding in more monitors, more panels, doing more things to add realism and have more features in my system. So that's my setup. I'll probably do another video on basic things that you can do to step up your simming game, such as recommended websites, recommended add-ons, and stuff like that. If you guys are interested in these videos, I've been posting several X-Plane videos, mostly just for the X-Plane community. So, you know, I post them up on YouTube and I share them with the Facebook page. If you're into those, you know, the Reddit Flight Sim community page is really big. There's a lot of good information there. If you're an X-Planer, the X-Plane Facebook page has thousands of people who post videos and information and reviews on planes and software all the time. So it's really good. You know, you should check those guys out. And you know, I'll keep asking questions. I'll try to make videos when I can. You know, I've been busy with life, so it's not always easy. And you know, if I still have plenty of insights as far as you know, Greyhound goes, and I'm still good friends with the hiring manager over there at Greyhound. So if you guys have any questions, you know, if you guys want to see an video with him, I've talked to him before about setting something up. So if that's something you guys want to see, just let me know and I'll consider setting it up. So this is I'll Talk with Phil. I'll talk to you guys later.